The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. The Covenant of Stone. The summer wind off False Bay came thin and salt bright, carrying the cry of gulls and the brass scent of kelp. By late afternoon it turned inland and rose over the first low spines of the Helderberg, combing through vineyards that were still more dream than order, trellises half raised, irrigation trenches chalking red earth, rows marching, but not yet drilled into a soldier's precision. From the ridge, the land looked like a book in the process of being written. Paragraphs scored, margins measured, meaning still concealed behind its author's patience. Zuriel stood above it all with his sleeves rolled and his jaw shadowed, a leather-bound field book open in his hand, the birthmark at his temple. The one that had invited whispers in another country caught the sun when he turned his head, a small, dark crescent in a sea of weathered skin. He'd trained his body to give nothing away. But the people who worked for him had learned that when he stopped moving and listened to the ground, something was about to change. "Not here," he said at last, kneeling and pinching a pinch of soil. "Here." He walked 10 paces down slope, knelt again, and pressed his fingers deeper. "Feel the difference," he told the foreman, a Xhosa man with a surveyor's eye and a habit of smiling only with the right corner of his mouth. "The water rests here in winter and escapes here in summer. If you cut your trenches this way, you'll fight the earth instead of letting it fight for you." The foreman did as asked. Mud clung to his fingertips, then yielded sand. He raised his eyebrows and nodded once, real respect, the kind a man gives to another man's listening. They laughed together without parting the distance between them. Trust here was not the soft kind that bends. It was a dry wood that would burn hard if ever lit. Zuriel paid on time, and well. He fed the children of those who worked for him before he fed the buyers who came with their soft hands and silver tongues. He left the ridge after sunset, the earth cooling under his boots. The farmhouse sat where the land offered both prospect and defense, a little above the vines, a little below the wind, with the mountains turned like shoulders against the worst weather. Miriam met him at the door, with flour on her wrists and a stray curl sticking to her cheek. Her eyes were the color of wheat at evening, not bright, but steadfast. "2 letters today," she said, handing them to him. Zuriel set the envelopes on the mantel without opening them. He would read them later, when silence sharpened the words into what they truly meant. The Hidden Codex. Later that night, when the house lay hushed beneath the velvet weight of darkness, Zuriel entered his study alone. The lantern on his desk sputtered with a low golden flame, throwing long shadows across shelves lined with tomes of scripture, ledgers of trade, and folios bound in cracked leather. He moved with the stillness of a priest entering sanctuary, for he knew that what he kept there was more than parchment, more than ink. It was covenant. He drew forth the oiled portfolio, careful as if unwrapping relics from a tomb. To him, it was not merely a bundle of vellum and paper. It was the codex, the whispered testament of his blood, the ledger of a people who had survived exile after exile. He laid it upon the desk, and the air seemed to change as though even the silence of the house bent its ear. Within lay maps that were more than geography. Valleys and rivers inked across the parchment bore ratios that moved like psalms when spoken aloud. Geometry turned prayer. Mathematics became liturgy. Some pages bore sigils carved so deep into the paper it seemed they had been pressed with fire. Their forms spoke in tongues not preached from any pulpit. Curves older than Latin, spirals older than Hebrew, signs whispered by desert winds before pyramids rose from sand. One page drew his eye as it always did, There the ink seemed alive, catching faint light from the flame and reflecting it, as though the page remembered dawn. An 8-pointed star lay at the center, etched with such precision that it pulsed when stared upon too long. At its heart, enthroned, the Lion of Judah, its mane flared like suns, its eyes fierce with judgment. Around it wound the Valknut of the Teutons, binding and unbinding, a knot of fates that had ensnared kings and slain warriors, and circling all, the Anak star, angular and solemn, the seal Zuriel himself had labored to craft, a convergence of lineages, a covenant heavy enough to endure the collapse of empires. He lingered, the way a priest lingers before an altar, hand trembling above the page. Then, dipping his pen into ink as dark as a raven's wing, he wrote at the top of a new sheet, Inheritance. Beneath it, slowly, with strokes deliberate as vows, not property, capacity. The words glowed in his own mind, as though carved into the marrow of his bones. For he knew what he was building in the valley of his exile was not merely a farm, nor even an estate of earthly legacy. It was something cloaked in the appearance of soil and stone, yet deeper. A fortress concealed in orchards, a sanctuary written in the language of architecture and vineyard rows, a covenant disguised as agriculture. He saw it in vision, storms rising that had no earthly name, upheavals that would rend nations as parchment. For that future, his work must stand not only to shelter bodies, but to guard bloodlines and preserve the thread of remembrance. And so he bent lower, adding to the codex by lamplight, his pen moving as if guided by hands unseen. The shadow of other suns. The door opened softly. Miriam stepped in, balancing a porcelain cup steaming with rooibos and honey. The scent of earth and firewood entered with her. She watched him for a moment before speaking, as though she too felt the heaviness that settled whenever the codex was opened. "There was a visitor today," she said, setting the cup near him. Her voice was low, her eyes steady though troubled. He did not cross the stoep. He stood only at its edge. A man with a hat too fine for travel, boots polished until the dust seemed ashamed to cling to them. He spoke with courtesy, but she hesitated. It was the wrong kind of courtesy. The smile did not reach the eyes. Zuriel did not look up at once. His hand traced the star upon the page, as though the ink itself demanded acknowledgement. Only then did he lift his gaze. And his emblem? Miriam's brow furrowed. A pin on his lapel, 2 stalks crossed, and at their meeting point, she drew the shape in the air with her finger. A thorn, polished until it gleamed like jewelry. For the first time that night, the flame in the lantern flickered as if a draft had entered. Zuriel's eyes hardened, though his face betrayed no surprise. He knew the sign. He had seen it long ago, not here in Africa, but across the seas, in the secret gatherings of Europe where bloodlines plotted beneath stained glass and candlelight. That pattern, he murmured, does not forget itself. They will return, Miriam said simply. Yes, Zuriel answered, voice grave, but never the same way twice. Her hand lingered on his shoulder before she withdrew, leaving him again with parchment and flame. Zuriel dipped his pen once more, the ink swallowing lamplight, and beneath the seal of laurel and thorn he wrote, "They believe beauty excuses them." The words bled into the fibers of the page like prophecy. For the first time, the codex bore witness to a truth he had long suspected, but never recorded, that there was another line, a rival inheritance moving through the shadows, shaping its sons as carefully as he shaped his vineyard. They too guarded memory, though theirs was cruelty baptized as tradition, domination veiled as destiny. And so the codex grew heavier that night, not only with his own vows, but with the shadow of other sons, the son sent away. The night after the sluice gate was sabotaged, the vineyard lay strangely still. The air carried the faint musk of water wasted, earth spoiled, vines thirsting before their hour. Zuriel stood at the broken channel long after the men had gone, watching moonlight pool in the scar of mud. He understood then, with the cold certainty of prophecy, the season of keeping his son near was finished. In his study, by lamplight, he unfolded the correspondence of years past. Among them was a letter from a headmaster of a military academy far inland. The man's reply had lingered in Zuriel's mind, not for its flattery, but for its brutal plainness. We do not break boys. We remove what keeps them from bearing their own weight. He had underlined it once, long ago, with the faintest tremor in his hand. Now, with Frederick nearing the age when strength becomes burden, he read it again as though it were scripture. And he knew. Miriam received the news in silence. She did not argue, did not scold, did not plead for delay. But in the solitude of the house when no eyes watched, she wept once, only once, quietly. The sound was like water dripping into a clay jar. Then she dried her face and set her hands to the practical task, folding her son's shirts, tucking them into the small chest that would travel with him. When Frederick came to her, uncertain, she smoothed his hair back from his brow and whispered a mother's counsel that seemed like riddle. "Watch the boy who eats alone," she told him. "He has the best stories." Frederick frowned, not yet understanding, but nodded. Some lessons are seeds. They bloom years after they are sown. At dawn, the wagon waited, its wheels already dusted with red earth, its driver watching with patient detachment, as though this departure were one among many. Zuriel stood tall, arms folded, his face unreadable. Frederick lingered before him, searching for a reason more tender, more forgiving than the one he knew he would receive. "Why?" the boy asked at last. A single word, heavy as iron. Zuriel placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, gripping with a weight that was both blessing and command. His eyes did not waver. "Because you will carry more," he said, "and men who carry more must learn to walk on roads built for less." No other words passed between them. The wagon rolled forward, its wheels grinding over stones, raising a plume of dust that hung in the air like incense from an altar. Miriam stood with her hands pressed together. Zuriel did not move. He watched until even the dust had drifted away, leaving only silence in the yard, a silence so deep it seemed to press upon the heart. Only then did he turn and return to his study. There the codex lay open, waiting. By lamplight he drew a new heading upon the page, his script sharp and deliberate. For the son when he no longer needs permission. The ink sank into the fibers like blood into earth. The words were less a note than a covenant, a message left in the hidden treasury of the family's future. For he knew that one day, when Frederick had borne the weight of loneliness, of command, of inheritance sharpened into exile, he would open these pages, and in that moment, the son would see not only his father's hand, but the shadow of a lineage older than kings, the vineyard as covenant, years ripened as fruit upon the vine. The land learned its rhythm, and the hands that tended it became as steady as prayer. Summer after summer, Zuriel walked the rows at dawn, his fingers brushing the dew-heavy leaves, feeling the slow heartbeat of the vineyard, as if it were his own child. The vines, once fragile shoots, now bore their weight with dignity. Their branches bowed, yet did not break. In the cellar, the barrels stood shoulder to shoulder like monks in silent vigil. Wood swollen with wine exhaled faint murmurs, the whisper of fermentation, the slow labor of time. Sometimes in the hush of night, Zuriel fancied he could hear them speaking to one another, low voices of oak, and grape rehearsing stories of sun and soil, of rains endured, of labor consecrated. But his covenant was not with vines alone. It was with people, with soil, and with blood. And so Zuriel taught. In the dim rooms where his workers' children gathered, he drew letters on slate, etched numbers into dust, taught them to reckon the balance of weights and measures. He showed them the rhythm of tools, how every swing of hammer and cut of sickle had its own kind of prayer. He taught them that reading was not only for sermons and contracts, but for survival. Knowledge, he told them, was another harvest one that thieves could not steal in the night. In the corner of his study, a hidden press clattered in secret hours. Its ink-stained teeth bit into paper not for wine alone, but for truth. Broadsheets emerged disguised as labels, their words folded into ordinary commerce. They bore messages sharper than blades, wages named aloud, injustices cast into light, the faint hum of freedom smuggled between bottles. Opposition followed, not in open fury, but in the patient cruelty of those who prefer shadows to swords, packages left at gates. Ledgers slipped into circulation, their numbers twisted to breed suspicion. Letters arrived that seemed polite until the last line, where courtesy turned to threat. And once, most unsettling of all, came a pressed flower, Edelweiss, its petals pale as bone, its fragrance cold as a glacier wind. The bloom had been cut far from this soil, preserved across distance and time, and its arrival carried the chill of memory. Zuriel pinned it above his desk. Not as warning, not as fear, but as reminder. The world never forgets the debts it means to collect. Yet he endured, not by bluster nor by force, but by design. He built with layers of silence and foresight. He trusted the language of ratios, the guidance of maps, the slow patience of coded geometry. His study swelled with scrolls and charts that looked like agronomy to the untrained eye, but in truth were blueprints of endurance. Meanwhile, his house, once echoing with grief, grew full again. Laughter returned, fragile at first, then strong. Miriam's voice carried over the kitchen hearth, steady as an anchor. Their children's footsteps beat through the halls like a song, and within the laughter there remained the necessary silence. Silence for what had been lost. Silence for what must never be spoken. Silence as covenant. The farm, too, filled with trust. Not the easy trust of naivety, but the hard-earned bond of men and women who had labored side by side, tested one another, suffered, and endured. They knew Zuriel's hand would not betray them, and in return they guarded his name as their own. And always he listened, to the soil breathing beneath his boots, to Miriam's wisdom, quiet yet fierce as prophecy, to the faint hum that coursed his blood, the echo of voices that seemed to belong to ages before him. Closing the covenant of stone was not yet finished. Its foundations were set in vineyards and walls, but its walls rose higher than the eye could see. It stretched beyond rows of trellised vines, beyond cellars and ledgers, beyond even the lifespans of those who now walked the earth. It had lodged itself into the marrow of his children, into the very DNA of his line, into the unseen future where footsteps not yet born would tread roads he had marked. Zuriel knew the day would come when another hand, perhaps Frederick's, perhaps one yet unnamed, would unfold his maps, decipher the sigils, and discover that they were not only instructions, but inheritance. Another would walk the labyrinth he had begun, carrying the covenant forward when his own bones lay in the earth. For now it was enough. Enough that the vineyard breathed with quiet strength. Enough that Miriam, his companion of storms, could outstare danger without flinching. Enough that his son was learning, though slowly, the weight of both bowing and bearing. Enough that the Codex breathed in the study like a second heart. Enough that the covenant lived, hidden yet unbroken, in soil and stone, in laurel and thorn. It was enough.